How are you all? Welcome to Steve's Kitchen. We're continuing the introduction to bread baking with a favourite of mine, and one I think everybody enjoys, just a simple bread roll. Almost all breads are just a combination of flour, water, a little seasoning and a tiny bit of work. I do highly recommend that you weigh out your flours. No self-respecting baker would ever do it by volume, but I know a lot of people in the US prefer to do things with cups. I'm using 450 grams, that's around about a pound of strong bread flour for this recipe. I will give you it in cups, but I will get comments down below saying my dough is too wet or dry if you use only cups. So if you just started out in bread making, get yourself a simple and inexpensive set of scales. It'll make things a lot easier. So we've got 450 grams of bread flour. Pop that into a mixing bowl. Now I'm using active dried yeast. I'm going to use 2 teaspoons. And just regular salt, 1 teaspoon in there. And it's always a good idea to keep your salt and yeast on the opposite side of the mix because salt can have an adverse effect on your yeast. Now we've got 280 mils, that's about 10 fluid ounces, just a tiny bit under, of slightly warm water. I'm going to pop that in there. A lot of people will get their hands in there at this point, but it can get very sticky and messy. I advise you to start off with a fork. And we're using that just to incorporate the liquid into the flour. But after a few seconds, you're going to want to get your hand in there. I'm just going to draw this dough together, and you want all the loose flour to come away from the side of the bowl. Now let's turn that dough out onto our countertop. Now again, throughout this series, I'm going to be using my hands to knead the dough. You can use a machine, but I think if you're just learning how to make dough, you should try and get your hands in there and get a feel and understand. But you are welcome to use a dough mixer if you wish. Now the idea is to stretch the dough out, stretch the glutens, fold it back, turn it round and stretch it, and you'll develop a sort of style. Now you'll notice when you start working the dough, it's got a lot of texture to it. So we're going to knead this now for 10 minutes. Now sure, if you want to use a food mixer or even a bread maker for that matter to do the work for you, you can, but because this is an introduction to bread making, I really want you to get used to handling the dough and getting a feel for the texture and the moisture content in your dough. Now after 10 minutes, you'll start to feel a different texture in the dough. And rather than that slightly gritty texture, you're going to have a nice silky dough like this with a great spring back. So now we're going to leave this dough until it at least has doubled in size, and that will vary a lot depending on the temperature that you're in. Try and find somewhere that's reasonably warm, and we're going to pop this back in the bowl, just a little bit of oil to coat over the bread and seal it to keep the moisture in. Now a little tip, because it's winter where we are, quite often your oven will have a light on it, and just having the light on in the oven can quite often make it a good temperature, an ambient temperature, to let your dough rise. Take a look at this dough. In barely an hour, it's probably almost quadrupled in size. It's full of beautiful air. I'm just going to knock it down now. So we've knocked all the air out of it. See how beautiful and elastic that is? Now what we're going to do is divide this up. I'm just going to half and half again. Now for me, this makes about 10 rolls. The way I would shape the rolls is like this. You take your piece of dough in a cupped hand, pop it onto a flat surface, and we just roll it around like that with a slightly loose hand until we get a beautiful dough ball like this. As you get better at doing these, you should be able to do 2 at a time. So you can just roll them around loosely in your hand, cup them up, and you'll end up with 2 beautiful little rolls like that. And I'm going to pop these on a baking tray on a little bit of parchment. Sometimes it can be quite fun to put the rolls quite close together, so as they rise, they join together. If that's the style you're looking for, go for it. If you find that a little complicated, you can always hold them in your hands and sort of roll it like you might a snowball. Again, it's having that combination between firm and not too firm to form a nice ball, but I do think it works better on the countertop. So I'll just get on quickly and finish these off. Now I'm going to pop these in the oven again, just with the light on. I'm going to cover them first in a plastic bag just to trap some of the moisture in there. And they really don't take long to prove this second time round, about 20 minutes or so, and they should puff up almost double in size. Now just 25 minutes and they've risen beautifully, and sometimes in warmer weather they'll almost prove to full size before you even get them in the oven. There are a few things you can do before your rolls go in the oven. Some people like to brush a little bit of milk over them, a little bit of an egg wash. even a little bit of sugar and water. I often like to dust mine with a little bit of flour. You can make a little cut in the top so that they bloom open. We're going to keep it fairly simple for this one. We're just going for plain bread rolls. I will actually dust a little flour on one side just to show you an example of how they can look. One thing for sure, once you've proved your rolls, don't be too rough with them. You don't want to knock them back down and get the air out of them. Now we're going to bake these for about 15 minutes in an oven. I've preheated 200 degrees Celsius, that's 400 Fahrenheit, and we're just looking for a golden brown. Now you can, if you want, experiment and put a little tray of hot water in the bottom of the oven. Steam in an oven can create a really nice crust, but for this one, we're going to keep it fairly simple. The whole house smells delicious, and that's the beauty of baking homemade bread. I'm just going to pop these down here. It's so very satisfying. I'm going to let these cool down a little bit, and I'll just show you inside what the crumb's like, and I'll have a little try as well. Now I'm going to take one of these rolls here. They're still quite warm, and you can see we've got a nice crust on top. It's hollow sounding on the bottom. Now this is still too hot, but I can't resist it. Let's just pop that open, have a look inside. There's a beautiful crumb. This is super hot, but do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to pop a little bit of butter in there because I absolutely have to try this. Fresh home baked bread. This is going to get you hooked. Taking such simple ingredients and making such delicious food. And if you're joining me along on the ride for this little series that I'm doing about an introduction to bread making, I'd love to see photographs and how you're getting along. Now I'm always getting asked about bread flour, so I'm going to leave a link at the end that explains why we use bread flour for making this style of bread. Share the love, give this video the thumbs up, and I will see you in the next episode. Take care.